welcome to Canonical, the podcast that takes literature out of the classroom. I'm James Shao, and with me are my co-hosts Iad Darris and Sam Spieler.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello. We are continuing our discussion today of Satantango by László Krasznahorkai. This is the second book in our series, Life Under Communism. Our discussion today might contain spoilers, like our discussion last week, I suppose. So, just go with it, I guess. Can't avoid it. If you'd like to talk to us, you can find us on social media at CanonicalPod and on Reddit at rCanonicalPod.
I don't think anyone would argue against me if I said this was a bleak novel. We already discussed that last week.
You're the man in the middle. No one ever argues against you, Sam.
However, is this a wholly negative or pessimistic novel?
Yes, next question.
So do you feel like there's no aspect of positivity or optimism or hope?
I think it really depends how you see the characters. Like, are these symbols or do they actually represent real people? Because it's clear enough to me that, these people from the estate are fucked and they will not be able to stop being fucked. But then you have the character of Ermias. Is he in the same group as them? Because he has so much more agency than they do. If he also represents human beings, what is the difference between him and them? And how do we as readers become more like him and less like them?
Is he someone to model on, though?
I don't think he's a role model, but I think if I had the choice between being him and one of the villagers, I would choose him.
Fair enough.
I mean, would you choose otherwise? You want to be the cripple?
No, but it seems to me that it takes two to
Tango? Okay.
Thank you.
Tick that bad joke bingo spot.
Ding.
I got last episode's It's All Greek, so you're fine.
Yeah. If you have the terrible idiots that can't do anything for themselves, you also have the person that's willing to not lead them, but con them. So maybe it might be better for you if you're the con man, but is that better for humanity?
I mean, the way the novel shows us the world, it could either be a world of total inescapable suffering or a world of suffering that's inescapable for some people, but not others. And it really depends how you consider the non-villager characters. Like, how do you consider Ermias? How do you consider the people in the town, like all of the barmen that he goes to or the captain? How do these people fit into the spectrum? Do they represent human beings or are they somehow outside of that? It's a challenge, I suppose, because honestly, when you read this novel, you tend to fixate on the villagers, right?
Yeah, I guess you don't necessarily focus as much on, say, the clerks who really have nothing to do with these poor villagers, except that they're writing up the report. And they seem to be living a more, let's say, normal experience. We don't know what their lives are like outside of this, a couple scenes. But I don't think we're supposed to focus on the government workers very much.
I mean, this is a dangerous question, but why are they in the book? It's a dangerous question because I feel like you could ask why X about this book, about most parts of this book. And as we discussed in the last episode, maybe that's not the point. But what do you think the clerks in, I think, chapter 11 or chapter 5, part 2, what do you think the clerks do for the book? I mean, I think they were really funny because they have to sanitize Iremias's report. So that's very funny. But why? Why is that a part of the book?
I think they specifically are not as important as the structure of power that they represent. And I think that structure of power represents kind of the bureaucratic factors or the bureaucratic forces in life that contribute towards this kind of paralysis or this kind of futility.
I understood it as a more symbolic, metaphorical presence. I don't see these as real people.
To me, the book, everything that happens on the estate and the surrounding areas feels kind of dreamlike or nightmare-like, where there's just this haze and it doesn't feel real to me. It feels very meaningless in general. And then when we pull back and see that there is more Hungary out there, there is more, a capital S state, then it suddenly feels like there is something at stake here, that it's not just bumbling idiots who can't get out of their own way and can't do anything but follow a con man. There is a larger thing at play. There is a larger cog and wheel in motion.
I mean, I keep coming back to the same question. Are they the same kind of figures in this novel as the villagers? Or do they mean to represent something else? Like, are they angels? Are they demons? Are they figments of somebody's imagination? I think that's a really central question that you have to decide in order to really offer a complete interpretation of this novel.
I hadn't considered that. I hadn't considered if they were on the same level.
The same plane of existence.
That's funny because that kind of ties in with some of the other things I wanted to talk about here. Do you see them as angelic or demonic?
I mean, you can see how their existence is meant to both provoke the villagers and also to judge them. So it does seem to have some sort of religious subtext. But there is a sense that the world that they live in, like you were saying, Sam, is real. And it's comforting to be in their world. The world of the village, the world of the estate is not a pleasant place to be. The world of them finishing their work at 5 o'clock and going home to their wives feels normal. And I'm wondering if that normalcy makes them more real or less real, or more human or less human.
Well, if we extend the religious metaphor, the estate might not be hell, but it seems a lot like purgatory, where things just continue and never really change, even though there's a veneer of change when they go to a different location and are sent to a different place. But nothing really changes. And in fact, we seem to see things move in a circle if we look at what the doctor writes at the end.
Do these characters have any fatal flaws? Do they have any sins to atone for? I think that it's clear that Ermias is not a good person because he's willing to torment these people, but he's not part of that same group. He's not being tormented.
Right. He's, I guess, the tormentor, or at least the person spinning the top and seeing how everyone else responds.
Did you read him as possibly being Satan? It seems to me like that's the obvious reading.
I think he could be, or at least he's a demonic figure. There seems to be like a wink to the Faustian bargain at play here, right? If we bring in Esti, she's what's being bargained for. Her life, her purity, her like if anyone feels real, she feels real to me. But they are willingly or unwittingly, they are giving her up in exchange for opportunity, money, a better life, something. They may not have made that choice, consciously, but that is what the book seems to be driving at.
I didn't really see it as an exchange, but I will say that that chapter was very interesting, but also very difficult to read chapter. Not difficult in terms of linguistic difficulty, because the whole book is linguistically difficult. I mean, like, when you're reading her and you understand that, I guess she's like torturing this cat and you don't really know what's going on. And then she's like taking this, what was it, rat poison or something? And you're like, oh my God, I didn't know this book was going there. Like that surprised me.
It's much darker than the rest of the book. As bleak as the book is. Yeah.
And she got tricked by her brother. I mean, that was a tough chapter emotionally.
Well, especially like you can see where some of that is going from a long way away, like the brother tricking her. As difficult as it is, you see it happening and you're just waiting for her to understand it. And it takes the entire chapter for her to understand it. And I think that kind of goes along with her mother and brother beating and otherwise abusing her. They give several names for her that suggest that maybe she is developmentally challenged or something. But yeah, that doesn't make it any easier to read. But I wanted to pull out a quote from the author about Esti, because she is supposed to be this kind of pure, maybe you can say angelic figure, but he says, this is from an interview that I will bring up later, an interview with Paul Morton for The Millions. Krasznahorkai says, "Please don't think that the tenderness of this wise, noble idiot is so easy to bear. Spending time with SDK is like spending time with a being of infinite purity. Purity is dangerous. The construction of purity has very important consequences. SD's purity stems from the fact that she is a victim, and a victim is always desperately rational in victimhood. It is very dangerous being with a victim. I love her so much, I feel physical pain when I think of her." If we're continuing this idea of, religious figures, she definitely feels like this kind of angel. And for that reason, I don't think I would look at the clerks as angelic. If anything, maybe, lesser demons just going about their drudgery.
Yeah, I don't think that Esti is angelic in the positive sense of the word. I think that her function in the novel is to show us something about this world that the characters live in on the estate. This is a world that can't tolerate goodness. It can't tolerate somebody who has sincere good feelings towards other people. And the options presented to her, kind of implicitly, I think, in the novel, are either become more like the people on the estate or die. And the turning point is when she gets to the bar and she sees the other people in the village carousing inside of the bar, and she sees the doctor and she hangs on to him at one moment. She's looking for some sort of sign that being a good person is acceptable, and he brushes her aside.
Right. This was the one person that ever showed her any kind of care at all.
So I don't know if she's an angel in the sense that she is good, but rather she just demonstrates how bad the situation is.
By the way, I think the doctor is pretty interesting because if you understand the people the village as standing for, just people in general, I think the doctor is kind of what the novelist, the person who's depicting the world, or Laszlo himself. And to put that doctor in that situation with Esti, I think is interesting because he's saying something either about himself or about writers. And then there's also that section about Hungary, what is it, being like a bog or a swamp or something? I don't remember. It's like a more of like an encyclopedic section. I think that was also part of the doctor's section. So it's weird. It takes you out of the book, right, out of the story, and it places the doctor kind of on a different plane as well. Even though he clearly belongs with the village, he's also someone who's outside of the village because he's watching the people and documenting what they're doing.
The book gives him this kind of clairvoyance that it isn't really explained. He somehow knows what is happening in all of the houses around him without being there, or at least that's what's implied at the end. Well, in the beginning also, he somehow sees all of existence.
I think I agree with James here that he is a representation of the writer or the artist or the intellectual. What I would wonder then is, broadly speaking, is he presented as a parasite, or does he earn his place in this group?
Well, he's left behind. He's left behind, but he's also happy to discover that he's alone. So I don't know how that falls in. He doesn't seem to be a parasite, really, but he's not a better person either.
There's definitely, at least at minimum, a mild criticism of him and also of, I guess, artists or intellectuals, because not only does he reject ST, there's also that section where he looks into this horror, right? The person ringing the bell, the madman, and then he has to run away. It's like kind of alluding to the limitations of what he can tolerate or document.
So when he documents these people and he makes his notes, what motivates him to do that? Why is he doing it?
In the beginning of the novel, when we first meet the doctor, he does talk about his process of trying to remember everything and keep everything in a certain way in his mind. I think that goes along with the whole futility of the rest of the book, but it also feels like this kind of vain project. Like, he's so focused on himself. He's so focused on the perfection of what he thinks is his duty or his life that he will happily forsake everything else.
Could we say then that he is representing rationalism? Because the world of the village is a very absurd place, and it seems like he has very mixed feelings about being in that world. He's trying to make sense of it, even though it obviously can't be made sense of. And when the villagers leave, I'm wondering why he's happy that they're gone. Like, if he was happy to make notes earlier, why would he be happy when they're gone?
Well, if he's representing rationality, he obviously can't fix things. He obviously can't make things better, but he also exists in the world without being able to change anything. So he's not absent from the world. He does exist, I guess, separate from the other characters, but we also don't know who he's even writing this for. You know, if he's documenting, is this an exercise for himself, or is this an exercise that other people are going to witness? Who is he being rational for?
I don't think he serves anybody else. I don't think he has a role in terms of the way he relates to other people in the novel, the way that like Ermias relates to the captain. I think that he is trying to make sense of this world, not for the sake of the other characters, but for the sake of the reader. The reader is meant to understand him as this human impulse to try to impose order on a situation. And his failure to do it at the end of the novel comes to his realization that by making notes or by thinking that he's documenting things, he's actually making things happen. So it's this kind of cyclical thing where you're attempting to be a neutral or detached observer, but in fact, that presumption that you're detached is actually what makes the whole thing start over again.
Yeah, I don't quite know what to make of that. I don't think you're wrong at all, but I don't. That seems very self-important, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the review episode. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth or in Krasznahorkai's, but do you think he sees himself this way, that he is a mover, a shaker?
I don't think that it's as good of a thing to be able to do as you make it seem to be. Like, you do create things.
Is he part of the problem, I guess?
Yeah, I think you would say so. I don't think that he is one of those artists who glorifies art making. I think he sees it as kind of a compulsion, maybe.
One of the things I kept coming back to is whether this could be read in multiple ways, if there was any hope or optimism in this book. And the Doctor was one of the figures that I was trying to fit into that idea, that he feels very negative in some ways, but he seems to enjoy this aspect of, if you can call it art. He seems to enjoy this documentation and narration. I wondered if the escape out of this purgatory, or whatever you want to call it, is art. But that feels a little too cute, I guess.
This isn't Station 11.
Right.
I don't think it's very optimistic at all. I did not read him as being of the same ilk as the rest of the villagers. I think he stands outside of people in general, like I said earlier, the way that a writer might or an artist might. Like where you document, you view, you see what's going on, but at the same time you're not really affecting change. So I don't think it's very optimistic at all. And so to your earlier question of if I saw any aspect of positivity or optimism or hope, I didn't personally.
So for a journal called The Millions, Paul Morton asked in a 2012 interview with Krasznahorkai if it would be a mistake to see the premonitions of Hungary's current political situation in Satantango. And to that, Krasznahorkai replied, "The idea of a political message in Satantango was as far from my mind as the Soviet Empire itself. I was only concerned to explore why everyone around me seemed as sad as the rain falling on Hungary, and why I myself was sad, surrounded as I was by such people in the rain." So is this just another case of an author trying to stay opaque about meaning? If there is no political message at all, what is this book about?
It's a very big question, but yeah, I think that it's not about politics per se, but I do think that politics are part of it.
Yeah, in the last episode, you mentioned that it was kind of like the meaning you might get from it by looking at askance at it or something like that, but that's not the central driving thing.
Yeah. I also would say that when we talk about political fiction, doesn't it usually assume some sort of a praxis? Like we talk about politics in order to affect change, to change the situation in our lives or in our countries. I don't think that that's something that Krasznahorkai would say is possible.
Then what is the point of this story? To just show us that we're all stuck in this village? We're all taking advantage of each other or being taken advantage of?
I mean, you make it sound like a bad thing. Like, is the point of a love story to end love, to stop it from happening? I think if it's part of human life and you can depict it artfully, it doesn't need anything more.
I thought you meant being taken advantage of and taking advantage of other people was a good thing.
Are we missing some context here? Because in the question he's asking about Hungary's current political situation. Like, what is he referencing? Is he talking about the rise of authoritarianism?
He's talking about Viktor Orban, who I don't know when he came to power, but it was definitely by the time of this 2012 interview. The idea that Hungary was able to get out of communism relatively peacefully in 1989, a few years after this was published, and now they're in the throes of totalitarianism.
I mean, I don't see that in this book, really. I mentioned in the last episode, I think you could read what Irenaeus does in the book as kind of an allegory for communism or redistribution or central planning. But as he had talked about, like that might be just the byproduct of what he's depicting here. As to Paul Morton's question, I just don't see it like in the book. If I were him, I'd be like, heck no, I didn't write it with 2012 in mind.
Right. But my larger point is that he seems to think there's nothing political about this book. He being László. And in fact, that there's nothing political about any of his works.
I feel like, if I may reinterpret it a little bit, isn't he saying that it's as political as human beings are political? Like human existence is political and therefore it's as political as that. It's not overtly political like you read an article in the political column or political section of the newspaper or something.
I didn't read it that way, but I see what you mean. Yeah, you brought up a quote in our last episode that is from the same interview. Krasznahorkai said, "It may sound odd to say so, but our situation hasn't really changed. The collapse of the Soviet Empire and the political independence resulting from it gave Hungarians a chance of building a new country. But it was immediately clear to me, among other things, that the real question was how we could build the new with the same old people. So the sadness continued to hang around. Maybe we have a little less rain than before, but that's all." So it sounds like you see that as a not political statement at all. But that, to me, that sounded pretty political.
I think it has political implications, but I don't think the statement that he's making is about politics.
In your reading of it, it's more just a statement about humanity in general, and politics is just a minor piece of that.
If we talk about the context of this novel, I think the point that he's making is our agency is very limited. Our ability to change our situations is very limited. So if we have the same people and we might want to make political changes, we're not able to do it. And yes, that is a political context, but we could also talk about making any other kind of change as being impossible.
Well, on that happy note.
Well, Sam, I mean, do you agree or do you disagree
With the meaning or with him?
with the idea that it's political or not political?
I guess I agree. I think the problem I'm having isn't so much with the meaning of what he's saying, but with the truth of it. I want to not believe it, but I think he makes a compelling argument.
Do you think he's talking about people, capital P, or just Hungarians?
No, I think he's talking about capital P people. It seems a little too optimistic for me to assume that he's only talking about Hungarians. I've met people. I think I understand what he's talking about.
All right, we'll stop here for now. Thank you for listening. You can find us on Reddit or on social media at Canonical Pod. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can go ahead and give us a nice review on Apple or whatever you use to listen to podcasts, or on YouTube. We'll be back next week with more discussion of Satantango. Till then, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.